Forget the 4% rule. How about a 6.5% rule, huh? I'm going to show you how you can do it. So we're going to look at this paper right here from a man, Jonathan Guyton. This is the origins of the guardrail strategy, which I talked about in a video yesterday, incorporating the right capital software. So we're going back to 2004. Jonathan Guyton had written an article in the Journal for Financial Planning talking about the guardrail strategy. This one right here we're going to reference is from 2006, where we had a couple updates, which I think is phenomenal. I haven't really incorporated the guardrail strategy to the T that Guyton has proposed here, just because there's a lot of moving parts, but it actually makes sense. And I've kind of incorporated it with my barbell strategy, and I'll get in that here a little bit more in detail. But before we do that, I just want to kind of give you the origins of the guardrail strategy and how using the 4% rule is deficient in your own retirement plan. You're gonna die with too much money, frankly, and you haven't spent enough. That's just, I can't say it's a fact. I don't know the future. You don't know the future, but if you incorporate these guardrail strategies, you can really give yourself a bump up. This will almost be like a crossing between my reverse RMD strategy, which I'll dive into more at some point, and the 4% rule. Because the reverse RMD strategy says, look, we know that as you age, you're going to spend less, 100%. Now, not everybody will, but the vast majority of people do. The evidence is overwhelming at this stage. It's really not debatable anymore. So we know that as you age, you're going to spend less. And as such, you take out more on the front end of your retirement when you're young and dumb and you can enjoy it, and you gradually take out less as a percentage because your spending goes down. I haven't really done a whole lot of detail on this yet. I did a little bit in my Wellington book, but more to come. Anyway, so let's read this. So the executive summary, again, this is from 2006, the Journal for Financial Planning. Jonathan Guyton and his partner in crime, William Klinger. I'm a big fan of both these gents. I don't know if they might not even be alive anymore. I don't know. I'm sure they are, but I haven't followed them. I just don't read that much financial planning stuff anymore, just because when the Journal for Financial Planning talked about critical race theory in an article in 2017 or 15, I said, I'm done. I'm done with you guys. Critical race theory is racist, Marxist crap, and I don't want anything to do with people who promote that crap. All right. Anyway, so right here. This paper develops confidence standards to measure the probability of sustaining an initial withdrawal rate for at least 40 years and the percentage of purchasing power maintained during the withdrawal period. All right, so he's using a 40-year time frame. Bill Bengen in the Trinity study, the 4% rule, only used 30 years. We don't want to use 40 years. That's silly. But anyway, he's saying basically citing increasing life expectancies. Don't use a 40-year time frame. I mean, look, if you're 50 and you're getting ready to hang up the boots, that's fine, because you'll probably live to 90. I got no qualm with that. But if you're 65 and you're using a 40-year time frame, don't do that. It's nuts. Consistently applying two new decision rules effectively eliminates the risk of exhausting retirement assets. So basically in 2004, Guyton had this initial proposal, and then he updated in 2006 with this paper. All right, so let's keep going. I want to focus on this right here for a second. We fixed the length of a retiree's distribution period at 40 years. We recognize that this assumption, while prudent, I don't think it's prudent, effectively understates the maximum initial withdrawal rate when considering a large number of retirees with average life expectancies. All right, so again, he is using a 40-year life expectancy, and he's saying right there that because we're using it for so long, that will underestimate your initial withdrawal rate. All right, so I just want to show you something else here. Guyton calculated the maximum initial withdrawal rate for this period of 40 years to be 5.8% for a portfolio containing 65% equities and 6.2% for a portfolio containing 80% equities. Now, I got big issues with that, but still, again, we're using a 40-year time frame. If you had 80% equities, he's saying a 6.2% initial withdrawal rate is doable. So that's shows you right there. We're literally well above the 4% rule, well above. So let's just go over some of the guidelines of what this consists of. All right, let's keep going here. All right. Right here. It's worth noting that the combined impact of inflation from the 1973 to 1974 bear market placed a 1973 retiree in a much financially more precarious position 4 years later than someone who retired in 2000. Isn't that crazy? So again, if you retired in 1973, by 1977, you were in a world of hurt relative to someone who retired in 2000, even though you had roughly the same similar bear markets, because the inflation that happened in 1973 and the 1970s. Interesting. Now, I tell you, there's a lot. So before you, but that's what's happening now. Hang tight. In particular, one specific question cannot be avoided. How high a probability is a high enough? And so he's trying to get a 95 to 99% probability. Whew. All right, so here are the rules. Following years where an asset class has a positive return, produce a weighting exceeding its target allocation, the excess allocation is sold and the proceeds invested in cash to meet future withdrawals. All right. Basically, what he's saying is, like I talked about my barbell. You got cash, you got bonds, you got stocks. If the stocks go up, you pull your money from stocks. If stocks go down and bonds are up, you pull your money from bonds. If stocks are down and bonds are down, a la 2022, you pull your money from cash. That's literally just what he's saying. Pull your money from your winners at 100%. And that only makes sense, all right? So pull your money from your winners. No withdrawals are taken from any equity following a year with a negative return if cash or fixed income assets are sufficient to fund the required withdrawal. So again, if the stocks are down and you got enough in cash and bonds, don't take any money from equities the next year. As again, I cannot stress this enough. Stocks are down, we don't take money from equities until they go back up. All right. As long as you have enough money in cash or bonds, 100%. Let's keep going. Now, he's increasing yearly withdrawals by CPI. Now, I find CPI to be silly, but be that as it may, he is giving you a increasing withdrawal amount. Where's the evidence that there isn't any? Why would anyone use CPI anyway when you got owner equivalent rent, and transportation is almost 50% of CPI, and transportation is 18%, which includes buying and selling a new car each and every year. No one's doing that, so don't use CPI. You got to find your own CPI, your personal CPI. Read my new book, Relax and Retire, and I'll show you how to do that. All right, let's keep going. And then he's saying the maximum an annual inflationary increase is 6%. So never in any given year are you taking more than 6% more than you did the previous year. All right. So this is where it gets interesting for all you inflation fear mongers. All right. So this is Guyton is basically using two different methodologies, time frames. He's using 1928 to 2004 as one time frame, and he's using 1973 to 2004 as the second one. All right, so we have two different time frames he's using this. And so I cannot stress this enough. This is a big deal because in 1928 to 2004 had a whole different relative inflation rates of return than 1973 to 1974. It's important. So the average annual inflation rate was 1.6% higher from 1973 through 2004 than it was from 1928 to 2004. All right. 1.6% higher inflation from 1973 to 2004. So if you're one of these doomsayers, like inflation is going to destroy us all, you'd want to model your plan based on the 1973 starting point because that's when we had the high inflation to start with, and particularly in the beginning of your retirement. Real, that's after inflation. Average annual equity returns were 0.9% lower from 1973 to 2004 than they were from 1928 to 2004. All right. So inflation was higher, which meant equity returns were lower inherently. I hope this makes sense because we're going to hit you with a freaking boom 2x4 here in just a second. So if you're using historical rates of return, well, in 1973 to 2004, your stocks averaged basically 1 percentage point less real net of inflation than they did from 1928 to 2004. All right, but check this out. Yeah, see the inflation, oh my goodness. Ah. Real average fixed income returns were 0.5% higher per year from 1973 to 2004 than they were from 1928 to 2004. Real average annual cash returns were 1% higher from 1973 to 2004 than they were from 1928 to 2004. Inherently, that should tell you something. The inflationary times did better for bonds than you are allowing yourself to believe. Everyone and their mom says, oh my goodness, the bond market is going to get destroyed by inflation. Guyton just showed you right there that net of inflation, bonds did better than they did from 1973 to 2004 than they did from 1928 to 2004. By 50 basis points, that's 0.5%. Net of inflation, cash did 100 basis points better than they did and during the inflationary times. Are you hearing me? Stocks did worse by almost 100 basis points. Cash did better by 100 basis points. That's a 200. That's like a 4-point play right there. Cash missed a layup, and you got a dunk. That's a 4-point play. There's a 190 basis points difference between cash and stocks over those 2 time frames. So all you people say, I can't be bonds inflation. Stocks did worse net of inflation than bonds did relative to the previous years. It's just a fact. So you don't have to do anything. You should have some cash and you should have some bonds. Because we saw what happened. Cash did 50 basis points better than it did the previous from 1928 to 2004. And cash did a full 1 percentage points better. And stocks did almost a full 1 percentage points worse. All right. Reiterate, we fixed the life expectancy at 40 years, recognizing that its assumption effectively understates the maximum initial withdrawal rate. Our probability of success is they have a buck left over when you die. All right. And we believe a 95% is a minimal acceptable probability of success. So we got 40 years. We have at least $1 left when we die. And we're adjusting with inflation according to CPI, which is silly, but I get it, man. I mean, you got to do something. And he says we want to have a 95% assurance that past numbers were correct. Now, they are using historical rates of return, all right? And I don't like using historical rates of return because I don't think we're going to get anywhere near the historical rates of return. So that's where I'd be a little bit more cautious than Guyton here. He's using historical rates of return. I don't. I use projected rates of return, and I use the Vanguard models for that. But let's keep going. So withdrawals increase in year over year in accordance with inflation, except that there is no increase following a year when the portfolio's total return is negative and when that year's withdrawal would be greater than the initial withdrawal rate. All right, so I want to show, this is a big deal, man. So if you have $1 million in your portfolio and you're taking 5% out, that's a $50,000 withdrawal rate, all right? Let's say the portfolio drops to $900,000. All right, we don't want to take more than 5% initial withdrawal rate, if that makes sense. So if you have $1 million in your portfolio and it drops, we want to have you to have basically a reduction in your amount you would withdraw by basically 10% is what's happening here. We don't want, if the portfolio goes down and your initial withdrawal rate is above, or your withdrawal rate now is above what it initially was, we want you to reduce your expenditures by 10%. Now, if the portfolio goes down, we don't say you have to reduce it because remember what happens here. Let's say you have a couple years on the front end of retirement. You have $1 million. You're taking $50,000 a year out of the $1 million, and now your portfolio is worth $1.4 million. It jumped to $1.4 million, and you're only taking $65,000 out. Your withdrawal amount is well below the initial 5%, well below. So if the portfolio falls from 1.4 to 1.3, your withdrawal rate is still well below the initial 5%. So why would you give yourself a decline in saving and spending if you're well below still the initial 5%? Only when the portfolio drops in value and your initial withdrawal rate is now, and your withdrawal rate now is higher than the initial withdrawal rate. That probably doesn't make any sense, but you got to think about it. If I'm taking 4% a year out, even if my portfolio had fallen, and I'm still now only taking 4.6% a year out, I'm still well below my initial withdrawal rate of 5%. It's okay to do that. It's okay to give myself a bump up. Let's keep going. It's only not okay to give myself a bump up when my withdrawal rate now is above the 5% that I initially started with and the portfolio is down. With all of Guyton's rules in here, many of which I disagree with because I think it's way too constraining, but using all these decisions, the maximum initial withdrawal rate could be 30 to 43% above what your initial. I mean, we're talking significant amounts of money more you're withdrawing above a given probability of success, applying no decision rules at all. So if we're using a 4% rule or something else, using these decisions give you 30 to 40% more withdrawal rate. Now, what I like, he said, what happened on the times that failed? Well, the times that failed, breaking the 40-year time horizons into 4 distinct 10-year periods, revealed that no failure occurred in the first decade, 20% of the failures occurred in the second decade, and nearly 55% of the failures occurred in the third. That's when you're 25 years into retirement, basically. The failure, okay, you still have your Social Security, you still got your house paid for. That's not a failure, I'm sorry. and 25% occurred in the fourth decade, which you're not even going to be around to see. You see, failures are most likely to occur when there are abnormally adverse investment returns or inflation rates relatively early in retirement. Again, the sequence of return risks. To further reduce a possible failure at a given initial withdrawal rate, a retiree must be willing to reduce their withdrawals. Sometimes you got to tighten the belt. I cannot stress this enough. Sometimes you don't eat ribeye, you eat ground chuck. And sometimes you go get friggin' turkey as opposed to even beef. Again, in 2008, if it comes around, you don't take that trip to freaking the Vatican. You don't go to Israel. You don't, I mean, come on. Just common sense. If 2008 rolls around, you say, I'm not gonna take that vacation. Common sense. Another area where I disagree with Guyton is frequently suggested that once retirees move through their so-called active phase of retirement, their go-go years, their income needs to decline in real dollar terms. That's not actually suggested. It's actually observed with empirical evidence through the BLS and also what you see with your own real-life experiences with your parents and grandparents. Now, Guyton disagrees with that. He says real-life client experiences, he says. And I wonder if that's true. I wonder if he actually interviewed all his clients back then and said, are you seeing expending decline? I don't know. The point being, this is 2005 is when Bernanke's groundbreaking study on the reality retirement spending came out. And I think Guyton was kind of, I don't want to say taken aback, because I like Guyton. I don't mean like that, like any negative thing. But I think Guyton was a little bit challenged. Like, are we really going to say that people spend less as they retire, based on Bernanke's study? And there was another guy and a lady who had written an article in 1999. Some academics said they got no traction at all. I didn't even know about that article until about 10 to 15 years ago. They said people spend less as they age. In 1999, that came out. So Guyton was kind of challenging that using his real-life client experiences. And I just wonder about that. Now, I'm not saying he's lying. I'm just saying, did he actually engage his older retirees to say, are you spending less or not? I bet he probably did not. I bet it's just intuition that he says, they're probably not. So real-life client experiences coupled with dramatically rising healthcare costs. Dramatically rising healthcare costs. So we actually look at empirical evidence that people are spending dramatically rising healthcare costs. Again, just because we assume that healthcare costs are going up doesn't mean they're all going up across the board uniformly. It's just we can't make that assumption. So if we're going to use real-life client experiences, we'd also want to use real-life client experiences when it comes to dramatically rising healthcare costs as well. And all of these guys, what they're talking about is long-term care, because they all fall for the idea that everyone's going to need some significant long-term care, and the studies just don't validate that. They just don't. On top of that, here we go right here. And an uncertainty about possible reductions in Social Security benefits. All right, so this is in 2006. That's 17 years ago. Even back then, they're like, oh, my goodness, we're going to reduce Social Security. Martha, we better not go to, take a vacation this time because Social Security is going to be reduced. Here you are 17 years later, we haven't reduced Social Security. I tell you, man. But they will. They're just not going to reduce. Whatever. Let's keep going. All right, so here's a capital preservation rule, which I kind of alluded to before. It applies when a current yield's withdrawal rate, using the decision rules we talked about, has risen to more than 20% above the initial withdrawal rate. So I talked about that yesterday, and I was using a 40% rule. So if you're at a 5% initial withdrawal rate, and now you're taking more than 7% from your portfolio, we don't want you to do that. We want you, in fact, to... let's see right here. If you have risen more than 20% above the initial withdrawal rate. All right, so he is saying once the capital preservation rule is triggered, withdrawal reductions above 10% aren't necessary, but you want to withdraw your amount by 10% less. I'm butchering this, but basically, so initially we're taking $50,000 off $1 million portfolio is a 5% withdrawal rate. So now if we're taking our portfolio is at still at $1 million, but now we're taking 75,000 out. That's a 7.5% initial withdrawal rate, which is more than 40% above the 5% initial withdrawal rate we were taking before. That's what I use, a 40%. All right, if you were to do that, you would need to reduce your expenditures by 10%. Reduce your expenditures by 10. So instead of taking 7,000, you take 63,000. Does that make sense? Now, Guyton does, I thought, a great service here. He says, once the capital preservation rule is triggered, again, we're taking more than 40%, Guyton says 20% of their initial withdrawal rate. we reduce our reductions by 10%, but taking it by 15 or 20% reduction did not noticeably improve the probability of success. So you don't need to freaking, chop your knees off. You just say, okay, I'm gonna tighten the belt by 10%. I don't need to go more than that. Now, Guyton is using a 20% basis here. So again, if you're at 5% as your initial withdrawal rate, and now you're at over 6% withdrawal rate, that's when you reduce your spending by 10%. I just think that's a little bit too constrained. On the other hand, and Guyton says right here too, we can increase your spending. Prosperity rule right here. In years where the initial withdrawal rate is more than 20% below the initial withdrawal rate. So again, now we're at 5%, and if we're below 4%, you give yourself a bump in 10%. All right, so now our portfolio's gone to $2 million. We're taking, I guess that'd be $80,000 off of $2 million. Is that 4%? $2 million, 4. I don't even know what that is. It'd be $80,000. That's 20% below our initial withdrawal rate. That's only 4% withdrawal. We can give ourselves a bump up by 10% as a prosperity rule. I like it. I think it's good. And I think that's pretty much all I have. A couple what ifs he does not address. First of all, what if, right here, what if the appropriate application of the decision rule, what is the appropriate application of the decision rules if a retiree believes his or her real income will decline at some later point in retirement? How would the 99 and 95% confidence standard change if we're able to reduce, if you didn't have a 99 to 95% confidence standard? What if real rates of return over the next 40 years do not resemble the distributions of historical rates of return? All that's good stuff. And that's where you got to do this on a regular basis. Just make sure you're still tracking. In Right Capital, I'm using very low rates of return going forward. I'm just telling you right now. So we're not using historical rates of return. I don't think you should use a 40-year time frame. And I do think that your spending is probably going to go down as well as you age. I tell you, don't freaking sit there on the front end of your retirement just giving yourself constraints, thinking that you need $1 when you're 100 years old. Don't do that to yourself, man. The evidence is not on the side of the people promoting that. It's just not. The evidence is on my side, which says most people spend less, and the vast majority of people are doing just fine in retirement. So give yourself some fun on the front end of your retirement by following the retirement guard rules. I'm a big fan, and I'm going to incorporate more into my own planning because I think Right Capital has actually made this work now, whereas before I wasn't quite comfortable with it. Now I am. So it's good stuff, man. I love your thoughts. Again, if these videos help you, you stay to the end and you want to buy me a cup of coffee, it's right there in the doobie-doo. And of course, if you want to be on these live streams every Wednesday and Saturday on Locals, 8 p.m. Eastern time, join my local channels in the doobie-doo, $5 a month. Now, we won't be going live on Saturday, this coming Saturday. I'm going to go fishing, so we won't be going live. But next Wednesday, we will. We'll see you guys.